The last customer left at 7:45, which gave Owen exactly 15 minutes to clean up before he could lock the door and go upstairs to his tiny apartment. He moved through the aisles of his bookshop with practiced efficiency, returning misplaced books to their proper shelves and straightening the reading chairs that customers always left at odd angles. The shop was small, just 3 rows of shelving and a corner devoted to children's books. But it was his, and that meant something on a space station where most people rented everything they touched. Station Kepler. 7 hummed around him with the constant background noise of air recyclers and distant machinery. Owen had learned to tune out years ago, the same way he had learned to tune out most things that didn't directly involve keeping his shop running. Books were simple. Books didn't ask questions or offer sympathy he didn't want. Books just sat on shelves waiting to be read. And that was enough. He was reaching for a cookbook that someone had wedged into the mystery section when he heard the door chime. Owen turned, already forming his polite closing time speech, and forgot every word he knew that a dragon stood in his doorway. Not a small dragon. Not a dragon-like alien that vaguely resembled Earth legends. A full-sized, scales and wings, fire-breathing dragon that had to duck its massive head to fit through the entrance. Red scales caught the shop's warm lighting and turned it into something that belonged in a storybook illustration. The creature's eyes were golden and slitted, fixed directly on Owen with an intensity that made his hands shake. Owen's first coherent thought was that he was going to die in his own bookshop. His second thought was that he really should have updated his will like his sister kept nagging him about. His third thought was that the dragon was carefully, deliberately stepping inside and closing the door behind itself with one enormous claw. The door chime rang again, cheerful and completely inappropriate for the situation. The dragon looked at him. Owen looked at the dragon. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched out until Owen realized he was still holding the cookbook, like it might serve as either a weapon or a shield, neither of which seemed remotely plausible given the size difference between himself and his unexpected visitor. Then the dragon moved. Owen flinched, but the creature wasn't coming toward him. It was moving to the reading corner, where 2 chairs sat angled toward each other with a small table between them. The dragon picked up one chair with surprising gentleness, lifted it, and carried it to the wall where Owen always stacked them at closing time. Then it went back for the second chair. Owen watched, frozen in place, as the dragon proceeded to close his shop for him. The creature worked with methodical care, those massive claws handling his books and furniture like they were made of spider silk. It straightened the children's section, returned the cookbook Owen had dropped to its proper place, and even adjusted the crooked welcome mat by the door. The dragon's movements were precise and practiced, as if it had done this exact routine 100 times before, even though Owen knew with absolute certainty that this was the first time a dragon had ever set foot in his shop. Throughout the entire process, the dragon said nothing. It didn't explain. It didn't ask permission. It just helped, working through Owen's closing routine with eerie accuracy, as if it had been watching him do this for weeks. When the last book was shelved and the last chair was stacked, the dragon turned to face Owen again. They stood there in the tidy shop, human and dragon, neither quite sure what to say. Owen's fear had faded into something more like confusion mixed with a strange, inappropriate gratitude. His shop looked better than it usually did when he closed alone. The dragon had even organized the children's picture books by color, something Owen had been meaning to do for months. The dragon dipped its head in what might have been a nod or a bow. Then it turned, opened the door with the same careful precision it had shown with everything else, and left. The door chimed one final time, and Owen was alone again with the smell of old paper and the humming of the station's life support systems. He stood in his empty shop for a long time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Dragons were real, apparently. More specifically, dragons were real, and one of them had just helped him close his bookshop for reasons Owen couldn't begin to understand. He thought about calling station security, but what would he even say? A dragon came to my shop and did some light cleaning? They would think he had been sampling something stronger than the herbal tea he kept behind the counter. Finally, Owen did what he always did when confronted with something he couldn't understand. He locked the door, turned off the lights, and went upstairs to his apartment. He made himself dinner, ate it without tasting it, and sat down at his old computer terminal to do something he had never done before. But he searched for information about dragons. The results were not comforting. The species was called Draxon in most galactic databases. They were known primarily as mercenaries, soldiers, and occasionally pirates. Draxon were territorial, aggressive, and considered extremely dangerous by most civilized species. There were 17 documented cases of Draxon destroying entire outposts over perceived insults to their honor. Trade stations often had specific regulations about Draxon visitors, requiring them to register with security and limiting their access to civilian areas. Station Kepler 7 apparently did not have such regulations, which Owen supposed explained how one had walked into his shop. Every article, every database entry, every official report emphasized the same thing. Draxon were not to be approached casually. They were not friendly. They were not safe. They were ancient, powerful, and fundamentally alien in their thinking, none of which explained why one had spent an hour helping Owen close his bookshop. He read until his eyes hurt, searching for some explanation, some cultural context that would make sense of what he had witnessed. He found nothing useful. The Draxon were warriors. They valued strength and honor and clan loyalty above all else. They did not, as far as any human researcher could determine, care about small bookshops on minor trade stations. Owen finally gave up and went to bed. He lay in the darkness, listening to the station's endless mechanical breathing, and wondered if the dragon would come back. He had no idea if he wanted to or not. Owen spent the entire next day jumping at shadows and watching the door. Every time the chime rang, his heart would skip and his hands would freeze on whatever book he was holding. But it was always just regular customers. Station workers looking for something to read on their off shifts. A maintenance technician who collected old technical manuals. Two teenagers who giggled over romance novels in the corner. And Dragons, HFY 730. Owen had almost convinced himself that the previous night had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Maybe he had been working too hard. Maybe the grief that he thought he had packed away into a manageable box had leaked out in the form of imaginary helpful dragons. He was considering making an appointment with the station's medical center when the door chimed at exactly 8 o'clock. The dragon ducked through his doorway like it owned the place. Owen dropped the scanner he had been using to log inventory. It clattered across the floor and came to rest near one massive red foot. The dragon looked down at it, then back up at Owen, those golden eyes utterly calm. Then, just like the night before, it began to close the shop. This time, Owen didn't freeze. He couldn't afford to freeze because Mrs. Kenji from the noodle shop next door was staring through the window with her mouth hanging open. Within seconds, half a dozen station residents had gathered outside. Pressing their faces to the glass like Owen's bookshop had suddenly become the most interesting attraction on Kepler. Seventh, the dragon ignored them completely. It moved through the same routine as before, stacking chairs and straightening books with that same impossible gentleness. Owen tried to act normal, tried to continue his own closing tasks, but normal had packed its bags and left the moment a creature from ancient myths decided his shop needed tidying. When the dragon finished and left, the crowd outside erupted into frantic conversation. Owen locked the door behind the creature and immediately had to unlock it again because Officer Yuki Tanaka was already there, hand resting on her stunner, face set in official concern. "Mr. Reed, we need to talk about your new friend." Owen let her in. Officer Tanaka had always been fair with him, never hassled him about permits or closing times like some of the other security personnel. She was small, efficient, and currently looking at his shop like it might explode. "I didn't invite it," Owen said, which seemed like the most important thing to establish. "The dragon just showed up." "Dragons don't just show up, Mr. Reed. Draxon go where they want for specific reasons, usually violent reasons." Officer Tanaka pulled out a scanner and started checking the shop for damage or contraband. "You need to understand what you're dealing with here. That's Kareth, and she's been living in our cargo bay for 3 weeks without proper documentation. We've been watching her, waiting for her to cause trouble so we'd have grounds to remove her from the station. She hasn't caused any trouble here," Owen said. "She just helped me close. That's it. That's not normal Draxon behavior." That's barely normal behavior for any species. Officer Tanaka finished her scan and looked at Owen with something that might have been sympathy. Has she asked you for anything? Money? Access to restricted areas? Information about station security? She hasn't said a single word. That clearly surprised the officer. She made a note on her data pad, frowned, made another note. I have to file a report about this. Administrator Volkov is going to want to know why a Draxan warrior is hanging around the civilian commercial sector. Be prepared for questions. After Officer Tanaka left, Owen tried to go upstairs, but Mrs. Kinji caught him at the stairs. Then it was Rodriguez from the tech repair shop. Then the Singh family who ran the fabric store 3 doors down. Everyone had questions. Everyone had warnings. Everyone seemed to know more about Draxan than Owen did, and none of it was reassuring. My cousin works security on Outpost Vega 9, Rodriguez said, gripping Owen's arm with genuine fear in his eyes. Draxan mercenaries wiped out half the station over a contract dispute. You need to get that thing away from here before it decides your shop is its territory. Owen finally escaped to his apartment near midnight. He made tea he didn't drink and stared at his computer terminal, reading more about Draxan culture, about their clan structures and warrior traditions, about the wars they fought and the destruction they left behind. Every article made him more confused about why Kareth kept coming to his shop. The next evening, Owen set out 2 cups of tea, one for himself and one near the door where the dragon always entered. It felt ridiculous, offering tea to a creature that could probably bite him in half without much effort. But Owen had been raised to be polite even in the face of the impossible. Kareth arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, like she had an internal chronometer set to Owen's closing time. She paused when she saw the tea, her massive head tilting slightly. Then she picked up the cup with 2 claws, drank it in one delicate sip, and set it down precisely where Owen had placed it. After that, she closed the shop. The pattern continued. Every evening at 8, Kareth would arrive. Owen would have tea waiting. The dragon would drink it, help close, and leave without speaking. The crowd outside grew larger each night. Officer Tanaka came by twice more, asking questions Owen couldn't answer. Station Administrator Volkov sent an official inquiry through the mail system, demanding an explanation for harboring a potentially dangerous alien. Owen had no explanation. He just had a dragon who helped him close his shop, and somehow that had become the most important part of his day. He started looking forward to 8 o'clock, started making 2 cups of tea automatically, started talking to Kareth even though she never responded, telling her about difficult customers or interesting books that had come in, filling the silence with his own voice just to make the routine feel less strange. 3 weeks after Kareth first appeared, Owen was shelving returns when he noticed her standing in front of the children's section. She had finished her usual routine, but hadn't left. Instead, she was staring at a picture book that someone had left on the display table. The illustration showed a family of bears gathered around a dinner table, all of them smiling. Owen picked up the book and held it out to her. You can borrow it if you want. I don't mind. The dragon's golden eyes fixed on him, then on the book, then back to him. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Kareth spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly soft, like distant thunder heard through thick walls. Do you have more books like this? With families? Owen's hand shook slightly as he lowered the book. Yes, lots of them. As many as you want. After Kareth spoke that first time, something shifted in the bookshop. The silence that had filled the space between dragon and human developed cracks. And through those cracks, words began to leak out. Not many at first. Kareth was not a creature given to unnecessary conversation. But gradually, night by night, Owen learned the shape of her story. She had been a soldier in the Draxan fleet. 3rd daughter of Clan Karethvar, named for the matriarch who had led their family unit for 6 generations. Draxan didn't have countries or planets the way other species did. They had clans, and your clan was everything. Your identity, your purpose, your place in the universe. Kareth had been born on a colony ship, trained in combat from the moment she could hold a weapon, and deployed to the border wars when she was barely considered an adult by human standards. The war had been over resource rights in a contested system. Kareth's clan had been hired as mercenaries by one of the factions standard work for Draxan warriors. It should have been a simple contract. 3 months of patrol duty and defensive positions. Instead, the enemy had deployed weapons that violated every galactic convention on warfare. Weapons designed to target genetic markers specific to Draxan physiology. Karith's entire clan had died in 17 minutes. She had only survived because she had been off-ship on a supply run, doing the mundane work that young soldiers always got stuck with. By the time she returned, there was nothing left but debris and the kind of silence that could never be filled. 243 members of Clan HFY gone, including her mothers, her sisters, her aunts, and the younglings who hadn't even grown their full scales yet. Owen listened to this story while they shelved books together, Karith's massive frame somehow fitting into the narrow aisles of his shop. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer sympathy that would feel hollow, just listened and handed her books when she reached the shelves too high for him to access comfortably. Draxan without clans don't exist in our culture, Karith said, carefully sliding a cookbook into place. We have no word for what I am now, no place in our social structure. I tried to join other clans, but I carried the death mark. Unlucky. Cursed. No one would take me. So you came here. I have been traveling for 2 years, looking for work, looking for purpose, looking for anything that feels like belonging. Karith moved to the next shelf, her claws catching the light. I chose Kepler 7 because it was far from Draxan space. I thought perhaps among aliens, my clanless status would matter less. Instead, I found that other species fear what they do not understand, and they understand Draxan least of all. Owen thought about his own story, the one he had been avoiding for 3 years. His daughter Beth had died in a transport accident, one of those random tragedies that happen sometimes in space despite all the safety regulations and careful maintenance. She had been coming to visit him on Kepler 7, planning to spend a week helping him set up the bookshop he had just opened. The transport had suffered a catastrophic failure halfway through the journey. No survivors, no bodies to bury, just a notification on his terminal and a hole in his life that refused to heal. He had opened the bookshop anyway, because Beth would have wanted him to, but it had become less of a dream and more of a routine, a way to fill time until time stopped matching. He went through the motions. Opened at 9, closed at 8, ate dinner, slept, repeated. The grief sat in his chest like a stone he had learned to carry, but never learned to put down. I saw you through the window, Karith said quietly, breaking into Owen's thoughts. 4 weeks ago, before I first came inside, you were closing the shop alone, and your face looked like mine feels. Like you were going through motions that used to mean something, but don't anymore. Like you were maintaining a structure that was already gone. That's why you started helping? Because I looked sad? No, I started helping because your shop reminded me of my clan's library. Karith's voice carried a weight of memory. We had a small one on our colony ship. Just 3 rooms of physical books collected across generations. It was the heart of our family, the place where we gathered for evening readings and storytelling. The smell here, the quiet, the careful organization. It felt like home. Owen looked around his shop, trying to see it through Karith's eyes. The warm lighting that he had chosen because Beth said it made books look cozy. The reading corner where he had imagined customers lingering with tea and good stories. The children's section that still hurt to look at because Beth had helped him pick out most of those books before she died. You can stay here, Owen said suddenly. In the back room. I use it for storage, but there's space. You said you've been sleeping in a cargo bay. That can't be comfortable. Karith turned her massive head to stare at him. You would shelter a Draxan? After everything your neighbors have told you about my kind. My neighbors also told me that grief gets easier with time, and that was a lie. Sometimes you have to figure things out for yourself. Owen moved toward the back of the shop, gesturing for Karith to follow. Besides, you've been helping me close for weeks. Seems only fair I give you something in return. The storage room was cluttered with boxes and excess inventory, but it was larger than Owen's own bedroom. Karith could fit if she curled up, and there was even a small window that looked out onto the station's inner core. It wasn't much, but it was better than a cargo bay. I cannot pay rent, Karith said. I have no income. Station authorities will not allow me to work most jobs available to other species. Then keep helping me close. That's payment enough. They stood together in the dusty storage room, dragon and human, both of them carrying grief too heavy to name. Outside, the station hummed its mechanical song. Inside, something that felt almost like hope began to grow in the spaces between the shelves. Over the next week, Kareth moved her few possessions into the storage room. Owen helped her clear space and even bought a cushion from Mrs. Singh's fabric store, though it took 4 of them sewn together to make something large enough for a dragon to rest on. The neighbors watched this development with varying degrees of concern and disapproval, but Owen found he cared less and less what they thought. Kareth still arrived at 8 o'clock every evening to help close, but now she stayed afterward. They would sit in the shop after hours, Owen in his reading chair and Kareth curled near the window, and they would talk. Sometimes about books, sometimes about their lost families, sometimes about nothing important at all. Owen discovered that Kareth had a dry sense of humor and a surprisingly deep knowledge of literature. She could quote from texts Owen had never heard of, stories passed down through Draxan oral tradition for thousands of years. In return, Owen introduced her to human classics, reading aloud while Kareth listened with her eyes half closed in contentment. For the first time since Beth died, Owen's apartment upstairs felt less necessary. He started spending more time in the shop, even after closing. The bookshop stopped being just a routine and started being something that mattered again. A place where 2 broken creatures had found an unexpected kind of family. The petition arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by station courier with official seals and formal language that boiled down to a simple message: get rid of the dragon or face legal consequences. 47 residents of the commercial sector had signed it. Owen recognized most of the names. People he said hello to in the corridors. Customers who browsed his shelves. Neighbors who had seemed friendly enough until a Draxan moved into the storage room. Administrator Dmitry Volkov scheduled a community meeting for the following Thursday. Attendance mandatory for all affected parties, which apparently included Owen and Kareth. The message made it clear that this was not a discussion, but a formal hearing. The station council would vote on whether Kareth posed a security risk and should be removed from civilian areas. Owen told Kareth about the meeting that evening while they were closing up. She took the news with the same calm she brought to everything, but Owen noticed her claws gripped the books a little tighter than usual. I expected this, Kareth said. Fear is a predictable response. I will leave quietly if that is what the council decides. We're going to fight it. You haven't done anything wrong. I am Draxan. For many species, that is wrong enough. Thursday came too quickly. The community meeting was held in the station's main conference hall, a room usually reserved for trade negotiations and administrative announcements. Every seat was filled. People lined the walls and crowded near the doors. Owen had never seen this many residents gathered in one place, and the weight of their collective attention made his hands shake. Administrator Volkov sat at the front with the 4 council members, all of them wearing expressions of official neutrality that didn't quite hide their discomfort. Kareth stood beside Owen, her massive frame drawing every eye in the room. Someone near the back whispered something that might have been a prayer. A child started crying and had to be taken outside. We are here to address concerns about the Draxan individual currently residing in the commercial sector, Volkov began, his voice carrying across the silent room. Multiple residents have expressed fear for their safety. Before the council votes on appropriate action, we will hear testimony from concerned parties and from Mr. Reed, who has been harboring the individual in question. Rodriguez spoke first. He talked about the Outpost Vega 9 incident about Draxan violence and the dangers of allowing warriors into civilian spaces. Mrs. Kinji spoke next, describing how the dragon's presence had driven away customers from her noodle shop. One by one, neighbors that Owen had known for years stood up and explained why Kareth was a threat. Owen listened to them paint a picture of his friend as a monster, and something hot and angry built in his chest. When Volkov finally called on him to speak, Owen stood up with his notes trembling in his hands. I'm not good at speeches, he started, his voice quieter than he wanted it to be. I run a bookshop. I read stories. I don't deal with politics or security concerns. But I know Kareth, and everything you've heard tonight is based on fear of what she might do, not on anything she has actually done. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of people he had served as customers, people who knew him. Kareth has been helping me close my shop for 6 weeks now. She's organized my shelves, fixed my broken reading lamp, and even helped Mrs. Singh carry boxes when her back was hurting. She's been nothing but gentle and helpful. She hasn't threatened anyone. She hasn't caused any trouble. She's just been trying to live quietly on this station like the rest of us. Mr. Reed, one of the council members interrupted, I understand you've formed an attachment to this individual, but you must understand the broader security concerns. Draxen are warriors. Their entire culture is built around violence and conquest. We cannot simply ignore centuries of documented behavior because one individual has been helpful with your shop closing routine. Then you're judging her for what other members of her species have done, not for who she actually is. Isn't that exactly the kind of prejudice we're supposed to avoid? The room erupted into argument. Some people agreed with Owen. Most didn't. Volkov had to call for order twice before the noise died down enough for him to continue the proceedings. That's when Officer Tanaka stood up. I have something to add, she said, her voice cutting through the remaining murmurs. I've been monitoring Kareth since she arrived on this station. Not just watching, full surveillance. I have 3 weeks of footage showing her daily activities. She activated a hollow projector. The room fell silent as images appeared above the council table. Kareth in the cargo bay, sleeping curled around herself. Kareth helping a station maintenance worker lift a heavy piece of equipment. Kareth finding a lost tool and returning it to the engineering department. And then, the footage that made several people gasp that IT showed Kareth in one of the station's lower corridors, crouched down and carefully untangling a small Centauri child from some cargo netting he had gotten stuck in. The child was crying. Kareth's massive claws moved with impossible precision, freeing the boy without a single scratch. When he was loose, she gently picked him up and carried him to the nearest adult, then left before anyone could react. That child is my nephew, a voice called from the crowd. A Centauri man stood up, his face marked with what humans might interpret as embarrassment. Finn went missing for 2 hours. We thought he had been hurt or taken. When he came back, he told us a dragon had saved him. We didn't believe him. We thought he was making up stories. Officer Tanaka nodded. I've reviewed all the footage. Kareth has been living on this station for 5 weeks. In that time, she has helped 14 different individuals with various tasks. She has not started a single fight, made a single threat, or shown any signs of aggression. The only reason we're having this meeting is because she's Draxen, and we're scared of what that means. The room fell quiet. Volkov looked at his council members. They looked at each other. The silence stretched out until it became uncomfortable. Then Finn's father spoke again. I would like to withdraw my signature from the petition. If Kareth saved my son, then she deserves better than my fear. One by one, other voices joined his. Not everyone, but enough that the solid wall of opposition began to crack. Mrs. Singh stood and announced that her back pain had been unbearable until Kareth helped her, and she was ashamed she had signed the petition. Rodriguez remained silent, but his wife stood and said she disagreed with her husband's fears. Volkov called for a vote. The council would decide whether Kareth posed a legitimate security threat requiring removal from civilian areas. Owen watched each council member cast their vote, his heart pounding so hard he thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it. The vote was 3-2 in favor of allowing Kareth to stay, with conditions. She would need to register properly with station security. She would need to check in weekly with Officer Tanaka, and she would need to maintain her current peaceful behavior. Owen felt relief wash over him like cold water. Beside him, Kareth remained perfectly still, but he could see the tension leave her massive frame. The meeting ended, but Owen and Kareth stayed behind as people filed out. Some shot them angry looks. Others nodded with what might have been approval or apology. Finn's father approached and thanked Kareth directly, his voice shaking. The dragon bowed her head in response. 2 weeks after the council meeting, Owen was reorganizing the history section when the station's emergency alarms began to wail. The sound cut through the bookshop like a physical thing, making his teeth ache and his heart race. In 3 years on Kepler 7, he had never heard those alarms outside of scheduled drills. The intercom crackled to life with Officer Tanaka's voice, tight with control panic. All civilians report to designated shelter zones immediately. This is not a drill. We have hostile forces approaching the station. Security personnel to your posts. Owen's first thought was to lock up the shop. His second thought was that Kareth was in the storage room, and he needed to make sure she was safe. He rushed to the back and found the dragon already awake, her golden eyes bright with alert focus. "Pirates," Kareth said before Owen could speak. "I can hear the weapons' signatures through the station hall. Old military-grade cannons, probably salvaged from decommissioned warships. They're targeting the docking ports. We need to get to the shelters." Officer Tanaka said, "You need to get to the shelters. I need to go to the commercial sector's civilian gathering point." Kareth moved past Owen with sudden purpose. "That's where families with children will be gathering. That's where the pirates will go first if they breach the station." Owen grabbed her arm, but tried to. His hand barely wrapped around the scaled limb. "You can't fight them alone. You heard what Rodriguez said. You're not a soldier anymore. You're a bookshop assistant." Kareth looked at him with something that might have been affection or might have been sadness. "I have always been a soldier, Owen. I've just got to pretend otherwise for a few weeks. Now go. Get to safety." She left before Owen could argue further. He stood in his bookshop, listening to the sound of weapon fire echoing through the station's corridors, and made a decision that probably marked him as either very brave or very stupid. He grabbed the emergency medical kit from under his counter and followed Kareth toward the sound of fighting. The commercial sector's civilian gathering point was chaos. Families huddled together near the back wall, while Officer Tanaka and 3 security personnel tried to establish a defensive position near the main entrance. The barricade they had thrown together from furniture and cargo crates looked inadequate against the kind of weapons Owen could hear firing outside. Kareth stood at the center of the defense, and Owen barely recognized her. The gentle creature who carefully shelved books and drank tea had transformed into something ancient and terrifying. Her scales seemed darker, her body coiled with lethal purpose. When the first pirates breached the entrance, Kareth moved like violence given form. The pirates were a mixed group. Humans, Centauri, a few species Owen didn't recognize. All of them armed with weapons that should have torn through the makeshift defenses in seconds. None of them were prepared for a Draxan warrior. Kareth fought with precision that spoke of decades of training. She didn't just attack. She controlled the battlefield, positioning herself so the pirates couldn't get a clear shot at the civilians behind her. When they tried to flank, she shifted. When they attempted to overwhelm her with numbers, she used the narrow corridor to force them in a single-file engagement. Every movement was economical, efficient, and devastatingly effective. Officer Tanaka and her team provided supporting fire, but even they seemed shocked by Kareth's combat prowess. The dragon moved through the attacking pirates like a terrible force of nature, and Owen realized with sudden clarity why so many species feared the Draxan. This wasn't just fighting. This was art form raised to lethal perfection. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it was over, 8 pirates were down and the rest had retreated. Kareth stood among the wreckage, breathing hard, bleeding from 3 separate wounds that she seemed not to notice. Behind her, every single civilian was unharmed. "Second wave incoming," Officer Tanaka shouted, checking her weapons charge. "We need to fall back to secondary defenses." "No," Kareth said, her voice carrying command that made everyone stop. "You need to get these people to the inner shelters. I'll hold this position. You can't hold against a second wave alone. Look at you. You're already injured. I am Draxan. I was born for this." Kareth turned to face the entrance again. "Take the civilians and go. Now." Officer Tanaka hesitated only a moment, then began organizing the evacuation. Families moved quickly, parents carrying children, elderly residents helping each other toward the inner corridors. Owen tried to help, but his eyes kept returning to Kareth standing alone at the entrance. When the second wave came, it was larger. More pirates, better organized, angrier after their initial defeat. Owen watched from the corridor junction as Kareth met them with the same lethal grace she had shown before. But this time, there were too many. Even a Draxan warrior couldn't hold against those numbers indefinitely. Owen saw the moment Kareth's defense began to fail. A plasma bolt caught her shoulder. Another hit her side. She staggered but didn't fall, didn't retreat. Behind her, a group of children huddled near their parents, frozen with fear instead of running like they should have been. The decision made itself. Owen ran back toward the fighting, screaming for the families to move. His voice seemed to break whatever spell had frozen them, and they finally began evacuating. But the distraction cost precious seconds. A pirate raised his weapon toward the fleeing children. Kareth threw herself in front of the shot. The plasma bolt hit her square in the chest, and she went down hard. Owen heard himself screaming, heard Officer Tanaka shouting orders, heard the children crying as their parents pulled them away. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion and too fast all at once. The pirates pressed forward, sensing victory. That's when station security reinforcements arrived, a full tactical team led by Administrator Volkov himself. The remaining pirates broke and ran, and suddenly the corridor was full of security personnel establishing proper defensive positions. Owen reached Kareth's side, his medical training from years ago coming back in broken pieces. The dragon was still breathing, but the wound was severe. Her scales were charred around the impact site, and blood pooled beneath her massive frame. "Stay with me," Owen said, pressing his hands against the wound even though he knew it was useless. His hands were too small, the injury too large. "Don't you dare die in my bookshop corridor." Kareth's golden eyes focused on him with effort. "Not your corridor. Station corridor. Important distinction. This is not the time for technical corrections. Always time for proper grammar." Kareth managed something that might have been a smile. "The children, safe. Everyone's safe because of you." Medical personnel arrived with equipment designed for larger species. They pushed Owen aside gently but firmly, working with practiced efficiency. Owen stood back with Officer Tanaka, both of them watching as the medics stabilized Kareth enough to move her. "She saved at least 40 people today," Officer Tanaka said quietly. "Maybe more." The pirates were heading for the environmental controls. If they'd reached them, they could have held the entire station hostage. Owen nodded, unable to speak past the fear lodged in his throat. Kareth had protected strangers, had thrown herself into danger for people who had voted to remove her from the station just weeks ago. She had been exactly what Rodriguez feared, a warrior, dangerous and deadly. But she had also been everything else that mattered, brave, selfless, and willing to sacrifice herself for others. The medics loaded Kareth onto a transport designed for large species. As they moved her past Owen, she managed to turn her head slightly. "Close the shop for me tonight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can't break our routine." Owen tried to laugh, but it came out as something closer to a sob. "I'll close the shop. You just focus on not dying. Draxan are hard to kill. It's inconvenient, but useful." They took her away, and Owen stood in the blood-stained corridor surrounded by the aftermath of violence. Around him, station security worked to secure the area and assess damage. Families emerged from shelter zones, looking for loved ones and trying to make sense of what had happened. Owen walked back to his bookshop in a daze. The door hung open where he had left it. Books lay scattered across the floor from the vibrations of the weapon's fire. Everything looked wrong, disturbed, violated by the violence that had torn through their quiet sector. He closed the shop anyway, just like he had promised. He stacked the chairs, even though his hands shook. He returned the scattered books to their proper shelves, even though he couldn't read the titles through his tears. He made 2 cups of tea, even though he knew Kareth wouldn't be there to drink hers. When everything was tidy and proper, Owen locked the door and went to the medical center to wait. The medical center's waiting room became Owen's second home for 4 days. He slept in uncomfortable chairs, ate whatever food the nurses brought him, and refused to leave despite multiple suggestions that he should go rest properly. Kareth remained in critical condition, her Draxan physiology fighting against injuries that would have killed most species instantly. But on the third day, Administrator Volkov visited. He sat down beside Owen without his usual formal bearing, looking tired and older than he had during the council meeting. The station council held an emergency session yesterday, Volkov said. We voted unanimously to grant Kareth permanent residency status and full citizenship. No conditions, no probationary period. It's the least we can do after what she did for us. Owen nodded, but didn't respond. Words felt like too much effort. Volkov stayed for a few more minutes, then left with an awkward pat on Owen's shoulder. Other visitors came throughout the days. Officer Tanaka brought updates on station repairs and the capture pirates. Mrs. Singh brought food and sat quietly for an hour. Finn's father came with his son, who left a drawing of a dragon protecting a bookshop. The picture showed a fierce red creature standing guard while Happy Stick Figure's read books behind her. On the fourth day, the doctors finally let Owen see Kareth. She was awake, barely, in a medical bay designed for large species. Monitoring equipment surrounded her, and bandages covered the worst of her injuries. But her golden eyes were clear when they focused on Owen. "You look terrible," she said, her voice rough. "You look worse. Don't try to move." Wasn't planning to. Moving seems inadvisable at present. Kareth managed a slight shift of her head. "Did you close the shop?" "Every night. Just like always." "Good. Routine is important." Owen pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down. Now that he could see her, could confirm she was alive and would survive, the fear that had been holding him together began to crack. His hands started shaking, and he had to grip the chair arms to keep them steady. "I thought you were going to die," he said. "When you went down, I thought that was it. That I was going to lose another person I cared about. I am harder to kill than that. Draxan are stubborn about dying. Don't joke. Not about this." Kareth was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried weight. "I'm sorry I frightened you, but I could not let those children be harmed. Not when I could prevent it. My clan may be gone, but the values they taught me remain. Protect the vulnerable. Stand between danger and the innocent. These things do not change just because I no longer have a clan name to honor. You are honoring them anyway. You've been honoring them every night when you helped close the shop. You didn't need to fight pirates to prove you were worthy of staying here. Perhaps not, but it helped others see what you already knew. That Draxan can be more than warriors. That we can choose to use our strength for protection rather than conquest." Over the next 2 weeks, Kareth recovered with the remarkable resilience of her species. The doctors cleared her to return to light activity, which she immediately interpreted as permission to resume helping Owen close the shop. Owen tried to argue, but Kareth was as stubborn about routine as she was about everything else. The bookshop had changed during her absence. People who had never visited before started coming in, just to see the place where the dragon lived. Some came out of curiosity. Others came with genuine interest in books. A few came specifically to thank Kareth for saving their families. Mrs. Singh's daughter started working part-time in the shop, helping with inventory and customer service. Rodriguez apologized to both Owen and Kareth, admitting his fear had been based on prejudice rather than evidence. Even the customers who had been scared away by Kareth's initial presence began returning, though now they greeted her by name and asked for her recommendations on books. 3 weeks after the pirate attack, a Draxan transport ship arrived at the station. For more dragons disembarked, all of them clanless refugees who had heard about Kareth's acceptance on Kepler 7. Officer Tanaka processed their arrival paperwork while Owen watched through the shop window, seeing Kareth greet her fellow Draxan with obvious emotion. That evening, 6 dragons helped close the bookshop. They worked with the same careful precision Kareth had always shown, handling human-sized books with claws designed for combat. It should have been absurd. It was beautiful instead. "We need more space," Owen said, watching the dragons navigate his narrow aisles. "And probably more chairs. I may have a solution," one of the new arrivals said. Her name was Sereth, and she had been an architect before losing her clan. "The shop 3 doors down is vacant. If we could lease it and connect the spaces, you would have room for proper reading areas and community gathering space." I don't have the money for expansion like that. But the station does, Administrator Volkov said from the doorway. Owen hadn't noticed him enter. The council approved a small business grant for you. Consider it compensation for damages during the attack, as well as recognition for harboring the individual who saved 43 lives. The expansion took 2 months. Sareth designed it, incorporating Draxan aesthetic sensibilities with human-scale practicality. They knocked down the wall between Owen's original shop and the vacant space next door, creating a bookshop that could comfortably accommodate beings of all sizes. Reading nooks for small species. Open areas for large ones. A proper children's section with cushions for sitting and a story circle for readings. During construction, the closing routine continued. Every evening at 8 o'clock, Kareth and her fellow Draxan would arrive to help Owen tidy up. The routine expanded naturally to include others. Mrs. Singh came to help organize the new fiction section. Rodriguez installed better lighting. Finn and his friend volunteered to sort children's books by reading level. What had started as one dragon helping one human close one bookshop had grown into something bigger. A community gathering place where species that usually avoided each other found common ground in stories and quiet companionship. The shop officially remained Owen's, but everyone treated it as shared space, a neutral zone where prejudices got checked at the door along with weapons and bad attitudes. 0.6 months after the expansion, Owen was shelving returns when he noticed Kareth in the children's section. She sat with a group of young beings from 4 different species, reading aloud from a picture book about families. Her voice was gentle. Her massive form curled protectively around the children who leaned against her scales without fear. Owen stood back and watched, remembering the first night Kareth had appeared in his shop. He had been so scared then. Scared of the dragon, scared of change, scared of letting anyone close enough to hurt him the way losing Beth had hurt. Now his shop was full of people and dragons, noise and life, mess and meaning. That evening, after the last customer left and the routine began, Owen made his usual 2 cups of tea. Kareth took hers with the same careful precision she always used, and they worked together to close the shop like they had done hundreds of times before. I was thinking, Owen said, stacking chairs. We should make this official. Partnership papers, profit sharing, the whole thing. You're not just helping anymore. This is your shop too. Kareth set down a stack of books and looked at him. Are you certain? Human law requires official documentation, contracts, responsibilities. I'm certain. You help close my shop every night, even when no one asked. You did it because you needed somewhere to belong, and somehow that turned into a place where lots of people belong. Beth would have loved that. She always said books were for building bridges between people. Your daughter sounds like she was wise. She was, and she would have liked you. Owen finished stacking the last chair. So what do you say? Want to be official partners in a bookshop that doubles as a community center for misfits and dragons? Karetha's golden eyes reflected the shop's warm lighting. Yes, I believe I would like that very much. They finished closing together, dragon and human, partners now in both routine and purpose. Outside, Station Kepler, 7 hummed its mechanical song. Inside, a small bookshop held space for all the beings who needed somewhere to belong. And every evening at 8 o'clock, the closing routine continued, maintained by those who understood that sometimes the most important things in life were the simple rituals shared with friends who helped carry your grief until it became something you could live with. The shop sign had been updated during the renovation. Instead of just Owen's name, it now read, Read in Karetha's Books and Community Space. Underneath, in smaller letters, everyone welcome, especially dragons. And every night, without fail, Kareth helped close the shop. Not because anyone asked, but because she had found what every clanless Draxan searches for. A place to call home and people to call family.